Here we are on a 2020 iMac. It's still supported, but it is on an Intel processor, which is being phased out slowly. We've installed Boot Camp and Windows 11. This is not a video about installing Windows with Boot Camp. There's so many other videos that are more well documented, but we're just going to go ahead and do that because we want to use the Windows on the iMac hardware to do our AI installations. So let's go over the install of Ollama, Docker, OpenWebUI in the Windows subsystem for Linux on the iMac hardware so that we can set up our initial AI environment. And we've booted and logged into Windows just to show you that we are on the same machine. We can see that we have Boot Camp installed and we have the Mac drive and the Boot Camp drive. Now let's focus on Windows. In older versions of Windows, you'd have to enable features and install a, quite a lot of things. But now you can just go to an administrative PowerShell and type in wsl.exe dash install, and it'll install all the prerequisites for you. This will install WSL2 and also your first instance of Ubuntu Linux. Once it's installed, you do have to reboot for it to take effect, but you also probably want to do a WSL update to make sure everything is up to date, especially if you had a previous version installed. Unless you need version 1, everything should be on version 2. The new install will install version 2, but if you have an old version, make sure you double check. Let's check our version now. We have version 2, 2.4, and we also want to make sure if we have previous versions, we set our new default to version 2. Because we just installed this, I think we probably want to reboot just to make sure. And we have rebooted and we are back in. So we are going to open our administrative PowerShell again and just double check our systems. Administrative PowerShell, there we go. And again, this was a new install of the Windows system for Linux, but if you were installing or upgrading from a previous version, you want to make sure that the version, at least for the one that we're going to use, is set to version 2 and not 1. We can see we only have 1, but we can list verbosely and see that it is version 2. Otherwise, we would have to manually set this one to version 2. Now, before we start anything, we're going to go ahead and get the Docker desktop app from docs.docker.com. Just you can just Google Windows Docker Desktop. It'll take you straight there. Download the Windows version for x86 64, not the ARM version. Download and install it, following all the prompts. And when it is installing, it's going to ask you a couple things, or at least give you a few checkbox options. For our purposes, we want to make sure that we have use WSL2 instead of Hyper-V, at least that selected. And it'll start downloading and unpacking things. While it's doing that, we'll let that run on the side. We're going to go into our WSL environment by typing wsl.exe. And since this is running for the first time, it's going to do a quick setup and set up our default Unix user account and set our root password. If you've already done this, then you're not going to see this, so just keep that in mind. And we're going to use the curl command to download the Ollama install. We could also go to ollama.com and just install it, but let's just do it all from WSL. Basically showing you how simple it is just to do everything on the command line here. Now let's skip ahead since that's going to take a minute. And once Ollama is downloaded, it'll automatically run. It says to run Ollama from the command line, but that just means use the Ollama command to manage Ollama. As you can see, as I'm about to just try to run it again, it tells me it's already running. So let's just go ahead and use Ollama to get a list of installed AIs. We don't have any because we just installed Ollama. Let's try getting Llama 3.3, which is one of the AI models available for download from the Ollama website. Now, as we can see here, this thing is 42 gigabytes, and that might be a little too large for our machine to run effectively. So let us just cancel that and try a different one. Ollama 3.2, latest version. That's 2 gigabytes. That might be a little too small. So we want something just right. So let's go ahead and cancel that. And let's try 3.1, which I know is just about right for our hardware. So it's 4.9 gigabytes. That's not too small. It's not large, but it'll fit in our memory and our CPU will be able to handle it. So once it is downloaded, since I'm using the ollama run command, it'll automatically download and run it when it's finished. Let's see how long it takes to start up. It's verifying the files. Then right after that, it's going to start loading. Let's count. 1, 2. It's already loaded in memory. So that didn't take any time at all. Let's take a look at our system resources. So since we know it's not going to use our GPU because our GPU is, I think, not supported, it's going to use our CPU and our memory. But let's give the AI a quick question. Are you there? And it responds. You see there's no activity on the GPU because it's not being used. Yeah, there's nothing. Like there's 0.6 of the GPU memory of 8 gigs in use, which is nothing. And no GPU activity. Let's give it something a little more difficult to think about. Write a 500-word response on who Chuck Norris is. And it is actually responding pretty well. Not blazing fast, but a little faster than normal speech. You can see the CPU is chugging away at 62%. GPU is doing nothing. And the memory is, there's like 21, 22 gigs in use, but there's like 4 to 6 gigs probably used by the system itself. So that wasn't so bad. Gave us the 500-word essay. Let's exit the AI for a moment here. See, when we exited the AI, the CPU just dropped and the memory is still in use because we didn't stop the AI yet, but I think there's a timeout of a few minutes where it'll automatically reclaim the memory. So we have our AI running and it's working. And we can list that we only have the one AI model, the Llama 3.1. Now let's go back to the Docker desktop. That install has finished. So we're going to use snap to install the Docker daemon itself so that the Docker desktop has something to connect to. So we're using the Linux subsystem commands to install Docker. Once that's running, then we should be able to restart the Docker desktop and have it go through its initial install because it will find Docker. Let's go ahead and do that. So we've restarted and we're going to start the Docker desktop setup. It's going to ask you a few questions, just formalities, just choose whatever's appropriate. Then it'll start the Docker engine. But we don't have any Docker instances to run, so let us go to Open Web UI. And I recommend going to the sources of any software you're going to install, not just follow what's along my screen. So go to Open Web UI because sometimes the installation instructions change. So whatever their current install command is, we're just going to copy it right off of their website. And put it right into our WSL. And there we go. It doesn't find a local instance of the Open Web UI, so it's pulling down the bits and installing it in Docker. And just a side note, the Open Web UI is not necessary to run or use the AI, but it gives it a web interface that you can launch from other computers. All this, by the way, we can also do this on the Mac OS as long as you have a more recent OS 10 version. Okay, so we're going to run our Llama 3.1 once again. No images yet in our Docker, but once it's downloaded and installed, it should appear in our Docker desktop. Let's take a look and see. There it is, downloaded, and oh, we have something now. So that is our OpenWebUI Docker instance running. Let's take a look at it. Okay, so we have our Llama running. We have our Docker running. Let's go to the web interface, the local web interface of our OpenWebUI. On the same computer, we can just go to http://127.0.0.1 :3000. Looks like it might not have started yet. This should be able to be reached by other computers on your network using its IP address. Sometimes I've noticed the first time you run it, it's thinking a lot. Let us refresh again. If it doesn't work, we can go double check our Docker instance, which is why we have the Docker desktop. Let's go take a look. It's running. Let's go look at its console. It's running. Okay, let's refresh again. Refresh, there it is. The first time you run OpenWebUI, or the first person that connects to it locally, will become the administrator. So if you run this, don't run it on the internet and log in right away. So this is all running locally in your machine. Set a password. Anyone that connects to it later, if it's set by default, I think they'll be asked to register and you have to approve them. Anyway, so we can see it sees our Llama 3.1 and gives us a nice web interface that we can type in our questions. Who is Chuck Norris? And see it run. Let's take a look at our CPU and memory statistics. We can see again 22, 23 gigs of memory taken. CPU is okay. CPU is low right now. It was doing something, but now it's low. Let's ask it and see what happens to our CPU. So you see our CPU go back up to 70% this time. And this time our response is inside the web browser. So it looks a little easier than on the command line plus. You can launch this from another computer on your network, and multiple people can connect to it. So now that we have this set up on Windows on our iMac, we can do a few more things. If we open this up to the possibility of training our AI in the Windows subsystem for Linux, which will be a lot easier than if we had done it on our Mac. The most notable thing is we can add external Thunderbolt eGPUs that we can use in Windows on the Mac hardware, but not in Mac OS. So stay tuned and subscribe.